Have you ever wondered why Myers-Briggs gave these four personality types their specific names? But Carl Jung revealed they actually possess some of the most bizarre and fascinating psychological traits that most people never talk about. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who laid the foundation for what would later become the Myers-Briggs system, discovered that these four types, INFJ, INFP, INTJ, and INTP, have psychological characteristics so unusual that they seem almost supernatural to other personality types. Before we dive into these mind-bending revelations about your psychological makeup, subscribe to the channel and leave your like. Jung's discoveries about these four types are so profound and strange that understanding them could completely transform how you see yourself and explain why you've always felt different from most people around you. Jung spent decades studying human consciousness and made discoveries that were so ahead of his time that even today, most people don't fully understand the implications of what he found. He realized that these four personality types don't just think differently from others. They actually experience reality in ways that can seem almost alien to the majority of the population. What Myers and Briggs labeled with simple four-letter codes, Jung revealed to be complex psychological phenomena that border on the mystical. Have you ever felt like you can sense things about people that they haven't told you? Have you ever had insights about future possibilities that seemed to come from nowhere but turned out to be accurate? Have you ever felt like your mind works in ways that other people find confusing or even unsettling? Have you ever wondered why you seem to understand complex patterns and connections that others miss entirely? Jung discovered that this isn't your imagination, and it's not because you're more intelligent than other people. It's because these four personality types possess what he called transcendent cognitive functions that allow them to access information and process reality in ways that most people simply cannot. These aren't just different thinking styles. They're fundamentally different ways of interfacing with consciousness itself. What makes Jung's discoveries so revolutionary is that he identified specific psychological mechanisms that explain why these types often feel like outsiders in a world that doesn't understand them. He realized that INFJ, INFP, INTJ, and INTP individuals aren't just introverted and intuitive. They're operating with cognitive functions that give them access to layers of reality that remain invisible to most other people. Think about the moments in your life when you've known something without being able to explain how you knew it. Think about times when you've seen patterns or possibilities that others couldn't see, even when you tried to explain them. Think about situations where your insights about people or situations turned out to be accurate in ways that seemed almost prophetic. Now consider how other people react when you share these insights. Do they look at you strangely when you mention patterns you've noticed? Do they seem confused when you talk about possibilities you can see? Do they dismiss your intuitions as overthinking or imagination, only to later discover that you were right? Jung discovered that these experiences aren't coincidences or lucky guesses. They're the result of specific psychological mechanisms that these four types possess. But what he found about each type individually is even more fascinating and strange than what they share in common. Let's start with the most mysterious of all, the INFJ. Jung discovered that INFJs possess what he called prophetic intuition. This isn't mystical nonsense. It's a specific cognitive mechanism that allows INFJs to perceive patterns in human behavior and social dynamics that haven't fully manifested yet. INFJs don't just understand people as they are, they understand people as they're becoming. If you're an INFJ, you've probably experienced this without realizing what it was. You meet someone and immediately sense something about their character or their future that they haven't revealed to anyone. You can see the trajectory of relationships before the people in them can see it. You can sense when someone is about to make a major life change before they've consciously decided to make it. Jung called this temporal intuition. the ability to perceive time-based patterns that exist in potential rather than in current reality. INFJs can sense the emotional and psychological momentum that's building in people and situations, allowing them to predict outcomes with uncanny accuracy. But here's where it gets really weird. Jung discovered that INFJs don't just predict the future, they can actually influence it through what he called archetypal projection. Indeed, when an INFJ sees a potential future for someone, their belief in that potential can actually help bring it into reality. They become unconscious catalysts for the very changes they predict. This is why INFJs often find themselves in the role of counselor, advisor, or guide, even when they don't seek out these roles. People are unconsciously drawn to INFJs because they sense that INFJs can see something in them that they can't see in themselves. But it's also why INFJs often feel burdened by other people's potential. They can see what people could become, but they can't force people to become it. The strange trait that Jung identified in INFJs is what he called empathic absorption. INFJs don't just understand other people's emotions, they literally absorb them into their own psychic system. When an INFJ spends time with someone who's depressed, the INFJ will often start feeling depressed, not because they're sympathetic, but because they've unconsciously absorbed the other person's emotional state. This makes INFJs incredibly effective at understanding and helping others, but it also makes them vulnerable to emotional overwhelm and psychic exhaustion. Jung discovered that INFJs need to learn to consciously shield themselves from this absorption, or they risk losing their own emotional identity in the sea of other people's feelings. Now let's explore the fascinating psychological landscape of the INFP. Jung discovered that INFPs possess what he called value intuition, the ability to sense the deeper moral and ethical dimensions of any situation with extraordinary precision. INFPs don't just have strong values, they have an almost supernatural ability to detect when those values are being violated, even in subtle ways. If you're an INFP, you've probably experienced this as an immediate physical or emotional reaction to situations that feel wrong to you, even when you can't articulate exactly why. You can sense inauthenticity, manipulation, or moral compromise in ways that other people miss. You can feel when someone is acting against their own values, even when they're not aware of it themselves. Jung called this ethical radar, a cognitive function that operates below conscious awareness but provides incredibly accurate information about the moral landscape of any situation. INFPs can sense the difference between genuine kindness and performed kindness, between authentic emotion and manipulated emotion, between true conviction and social conformity. But here's the weird part. Jung discovered that INFPs don't just sense these moral dimensions, they're compelled to act on them. INFPs have what he called compulsive authenticity. They literally cannot maintain relationships or situations that violate their core values, even when it would be easier or more advantageous to do so. This isn't stubbornness or inflexibility. It's a psychological mechanism that makes INFPs physically and emotionally uncomfortable when they're in environments that conflict with their values. They can't just go along to get along because their psyche rebels against inauthenticity at a cellular level. The strange trait Jung identified in INFPs is what he called emotional alchemy. INFPs have the ability to transform negative emotions into creative and spiritual insights with remarkable consistency. When an INFP experiences pain, disappointment, or trauma, their psyche automatically begins a process of finding meaning and beauty in that experience. This isn't positive thinking or denial, it's a genuine psychological mechanism that allows INFPs to extract wisdom and creativity from suffering. Jung discovered that INFPs often produce their most profound work and insights during or immediately after periods of emotional difficulty, because their psyche is designed to transform pain into art, wisdom, and deeper understanding. Now let's dive into the extraordinary mental architecture of the INTJ. Jung discovered that INTJs possess what he called systematic prophecy, the ability to see how complex systems will evolve over time with remarkable accuracy. INTJs don't just understand how things work now, they understand how things will work in the future based on current trends and patterns. If you're an INTJ, you've probably experienced this as an ability to predict the long-term consequences of decisions, policies, or trends that other people can't see. You can look at a business strategy and immediately see why it will fail in 3 years. You can observe social or political movements and predict how they'll evolve. You can see the logical endpoint of current trajectories that others are blind to. Jung called this temporal logic, a cognitive function that allows INTJs to project logical patterns forward in time. INTJs don't just think logically about current reality, they think logically about future reality, which gives them an almost prophetic ability to anticipate outcomes. But here's where it gets really strange. Jung discovered that INTJs don't just predict future problems, they're compulsively driven to solve them before they happen. INTJs have what he called preemptive problem solving. They can't help but try to fix problems that don't exist yet, but will exist if current patterns continue. This makes INTJs incredibly valuable as strategic planners and system designers, but it also makes them incredibly frustrated when other people can't see the problems they're trying to prevent. INTJs often find themselves in the position of Cassandra, able to see future disasters but unable to convince others to take preventive action. The weird trait Jung identified in INTJs is what he called efficiency obsession. And INTJs don't just prefer efficient systems, they're psychologically disturbed by inefficiency in ways that other people find extreme. When an INTJ encounters a system that's working at 70% efficiency when it could work at 95% efficiency, they experience genuine psychological discomfort. This isn't perfectionism or control issues. It's a cognitive function that makes INTJs acutely aware of wasted potential in any system. Jung discovered that INTJs can't help but see how things could be optimized, and they're compulsively driven to implement those optimizations, even when others are satisfied with good enough. Finally, let's explore the fascinating cognitive landscape of the INTP. Jung discovered that INTPs possess what he called conceptual X-ray vision, the ability to see through surface appearances and understand the underlying logical structures of any phenomenon with extraordinary clarity. If you're an INTP, you've probably experienced this as an ability to immediately see the flaws in arguments, theories, or systems that other people accept without question. You can detect logical inconsistencies, hidden assumptions, and conceptual errors that others miss entirely. You can see the difference between what people say they believe and what they actually believe based on their actions. Jung called this structural intuition, a cognitive function that allows INTPs to perceive the invisible architecture of ideas, systems, and beliefs. INTPs don't just think about concepts, they can see the relationships between concepts in ways that reveal hidden patterns and connections. But here's the weird part. Jung discovered that INTPs don't just understand these structures, they're compulsively driven to deconstruct and reconstruct them. INTPs have what he called compulsive analysis. They literally cannot encounter an idea or system without automatically analyzing its components and looking for ways to improve its logical consistency. This makes INTPs incredibly valuable as researchers, theorists, and problem solvers, but it also makes them incredibly frustrated with the logical inconsistencies they see everywhere in human society. INTPs often feel like they're surrounded by people who accept contradictory beliefs and illogical systems without question. The strange trait Jung identified in INTPs is what he called truth addiction. ENTPs don't just prefer truth to falsehood, they're psychologically addicted to the pursuit of truth in ways that can seem obsessive to other people. When an INTP encounters a question they can't answer or a problem they can't solve, they experience genuine psychological withdrawal until they find a satisfactory explanation. This isn't curiosity or intellectual interest, it's a psychological compulsion that makes INTPs unable to rest when they encounter unresolved logical problems. Jung discovered that INTPs will often sacrifice sleep, social relationships, and practical concerns in pursuit of understanding, because their psyche is literally addicted to the neurochemical reward of discovering truth. Here's what Jung understood about these four types that Myers and Briggs couldn't fully capture in their system. These aren't just personality preferences, they're fundamentally different ways of interfacing with reality itself. These types don't just think differently, they perceive different layers of information that other types can't access. Jung realized that these four types often feel alienated from mainstream society, not because they're antisocial or difficult, but because they're operating with cognitive functions that give them access to information that most people can't perceive. They see patterns, possibilities, inefficiencies, and truths that remain invisible to the majority of the population. But Jung also discovered something crucial about these types. Their weird traits aren't just interesting curiosities, they're evolutionary adaptations. These cognitive functions exist because human society needs people who can see beyond current reality, who can detect moral violations, who can predict systemic problems, and who can discover deeper truths. The challenge for these types is learning to navigate a world that often doesn't understand or appreciate their unique cognitive gifts. Jung showed that the key is not to suppress these weird traits, but to understand them, develop them, and find ways to use them constructively in a world that desperately needs what these types have to offer. Understanding your weird traits isn't about feeling superior to other people. It's about understanding why you've always felt different and learning to use your unique cognitive gifts in ways that serve both your own development and the greater good of humanity. What weird traits have you noticed in yourself that you never understood before? How might these traits actually be cognitive superpowers that you've been taught to see as problems? Jung's discoveries suggest that your weirdness might actually be your greatest gift to the world. You just need to understand how to unwrap it.